Good morning.
Good morning.
Sometimes I think to myself, wouldn't it be nice to know about what you need for change before you found yourself right in the middle of it? Wouldn't it be nice to be prepared? Regrettably, in life, we rarely have the opportunity to fully calculate and adjust to know exactly where we are and how we are and who we should be. This is incredibly felt by a Christian people and an institutional church who often forms our gaze firmly upon the eternal promise. And with it, we place all those cultural pieces of our faith and the action of it that might appear to us or might seem to us as though it was a necessity. Sometimes, and some might argue oftentimes, with our chins held high and our eyes focused upon the sky, so much that the church and its people are often the last to know and the last to react to the world around us. This resonates with the saying that echoes through many of the halls of the dioceses around the country and conventions and clergy corners that repeat this again and again. The church is 10 to 20 years behind the modern world. Have you ever heard this before? And it certainly doesn't help that priests and leaders of the church are oftentimes surrounded by those wanting to stay focused upon what is considered ancient, sacred, traditional, and lasting. But be aware as to how often we attempt to loop these words together. Ancient, sacred, traditional, and lasting. Almost as if to imply that they represent and mean the same thing, or even worse, that they might mean the most important thing, but they do not. Yet, it may appear that we hold on to these things, these cultural pieces of us that we place with our faith and our practice so tightly that in doing so, sometimes we fail to fully embrace God's call upon our lives. This year in October, next month, it will mark for me the 14th year from whence my preparation for ministry began. I've been ordained for just 10 years. But it was 14 years ago that my wife and I, my wife who's also a priest in the Episcopal Church, first stood up for postulancy, which is like the second or the third step towards becoming a priest, in the Episcopal Diocese of Massachusetts, standing shoulder to shoulder there with 300 plus other candidates seeking the same hope. Filling at the time over half of the cathedral pews in that Boston site. At this time, to give you context, local parishes like this one and local parishes like the one that I was sent from enjoyed the luxury of having 20 to 50 applicants apply for positions for the church. Whenever they would do a call for a rector or a priest in charge or an associate, it was almost so much that they couldn't handle it. But to give you reference to that and reference to a change, by the time that I was to apply to this call here at Caroline, only 3 clergy total applied for this call here. These are just some of the signs that the Episcopal Church and the denominational church at large was at the tail end of a professional corporate legacy of church, the conclusion of which would show the ultimate instability of the previous church model and a legacy church of participants who somehow seemed to just drift away, where we were left to ask the question, where did they go? But a professional and corporate legacy that had already ended in much the same way as it was experienced in the Anglican Church in Canada and the Church of England. Many in academia have called this the God is dead phase. Many a sociologist. I don't subscribe to this phrasing or terminology. I instead call it the time that the church forgot phase. But in our instance, my wife and my instance, from the 300 plus applicants for the priesthood in Massachusetts, the diocese ultimately only would choose 6 people to move forward. It was a sign that the landscape of the church was changing. But I certainly didn't understand it. I wasn't even worried about it. I was just happy to be picked. I didn't understand it until I arrived at my first post as a vicar on the western coast of Newfoundland in Canada. There in Canada, as a new clergy, fresh out of the box, I was assigned 7 parish churches with a population of just over 5,000 cultural and practicing Anglicans, stretching over a 250 square mile territory. Just me and my Mazda 3 and some snow tires. At the time, it was one of the largest parish placements for Anglican clergy in North America. I was sent there to close parishes, to combine parishes, and to leave fertile soil for the ministers that were to follow. And my question then is the same question that we should be asking now, which is the question, why? Why, with a population that big, with a denomination that big, with that kind of participation, are we closing churches? Is it because of the structure of the church? Or is it because of something perhaps that we forgot? Upon my arrival, I was so immersed in the regular production of church and the growth of those churches that I had little time to focus on anything but that, let alone what appeared to be these whimsical and fairy tale notions of what was changing in the church. I wasn't able to fully understand it or even address it, except to say that I realized that even those 7 churches, even those 7 or 5,000 people had an unsustainable institution. So you ask the question, how can a parish community that big be so unsustainable? Not sustainable when in my first year of ministry, I buried over 100 folks. I married over 60 couples. I performed over 100 baptisms. I delivered enough sacramental bread and wine to qualify as a successful commercial baker and vintner. But not sustainable. Not sustainable, but clearly still needed. And I struggled with this, as we are to struggle with it today. And I asked, what does this mean for the way that we are to participate in creating and propagating church? And so this morning, I want to just speak of one example I had with one particular church with a vestry who was incredibly flexible, who was dealing with this challenge. The beginning of this story really starts in a brief vestry meeting with vestry members of that community knowing and understanding the writing that was written on the wall. And so we decided in our wisdom to call a community meeting, not just a meeting for the vestry, not just one for the congregation, but one for the entire community with which we served. And so the vestry approved the writing of a flyer that would be placed in every Protestant mailbox in the surrounding neighborhoods. And you ask me how I know this. We knew exactly whose mailbox was Protestant and exactly whose was Catholic. It was that divided there. And the letter was simple. It said, please join us for a meeting to discuss the future of the following 3 parishes. It'll be on this day, it'll be on this time, it'll be in this place. And I wrote it on blaze orange paper, so they were sure to see it. And then, and this is an important part, with the permission of my vestry, I got in touch with the local real estate agent. There was only one. We were very rural. I got in touch with the local real estate agent about a week out from the meeting, and in an effort to garner more participation, I had the real estate agent install a for sale sign in front of the church. It was an attempt to get people to notice what we were talking about. It was a bit cheeky, but it worked. In that meeting of the town and the towns that surrounded us, our largest church where we had the meeting was completely full, over 500 people, standing room only, full in a way that it had not been full in years, with the realized consequence of the sharpened pitchforks and the blazing torches that I had created with the implementation of that for sale sign. But importantly, my guerrilla marketing worked. With no intent for selling the church and no formal mention of the for sale sign, a sign that I took down the day before the meeting, I took the pulpit and I just asked the people that were there a simple question. I said, "Are you here to save the church?" And I looked around and I said, "Would you be willing to raise your hands if you're here to save the church?" And so what do you think they did? They raised their hands, all of them. I saw nothing but palms raised high in the air. Then I asked them the second question: "Are you willing to help us to save it?" And again, every hand in the room went up. And to that, all I said was, "Great. Fantastic. Let's save the church. Let's save the church, but we need your help. We need to know the church that you need us to be, so that you and me and we can be part of that church together. We need to know the church that we need to be, not just the church that we've been." And I think herein lies the problem. This challenge is not just a challenge for the Anglican Church and a specific denomination. It's for the entire church, ours as well. We've inherited a professional and corporate model of church that served its place in time during its place in time, but now is too big and too expensive to continue to have in the same way. A congregational model that said, if you build it, they'll come. If we create the ministry and open the door, they'll show up. By the way, that's the Episcopal model for evangelization. We unlock the front door. If we provide a priest and a choir and education and children's programs, a pretty building and a Bible study, that'll be enough. And in 2024, I want to tell you that approach now must be different. It must be a church that no longer is just asking, how can we get more people in the pews? Instead, it needs to be a church that says, what might God be up to in the lives of our neighbors? And how might we be involved in that? It's a process of strengthening our base, and we're doing that work now in amazing and dynamic ways. And then reaching out beyond ourselves, and to do all this in the effort of sacrifice. Sacrifice. A sacrificial living where we might be willing to depart from the preconceived notions of what church has to be, and a willingness to walk where God might be calling us into the lives of others. Sacrifice not by way of just a willingness to come to church. This is important. This is the place where we become renewed and receive the gift of grace from Jesus Christ. But sacrifice by a willing to join us in asking questions about our community and how we can serve them. It's a story of a church that is not just bound with a Sunday liturgy and a congregational expectation of music and message, but it's one that has the flexibility to step from its walls, turn down our gaze, and look intently at the people that surround us and find Jesus Christ there, so that we can be the Spirit of God that is present there too. And it's an effort in sharing that work, sharing that vision, and enacting the knowledge that everyone here has a role to play in that process. Amen.